Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, WKYT Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey will talk with us about the winter outlook. What are we heading into in the months ahead? That's a little bit later. But first, the head of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce is here. The state's largest business organization has an agenda for the coming legislative session, and there are several things they'll be watching very closely. Will pensions be addressed again in any way? Will lawmakers approve sports betting? And how will the legislature deal with calls to make changes to the recently passed extension of the sales tax to some services? Nonprofit groups have been vocal about the tax coming their way. Dave Adkisson is the longtime head of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. He also has political experience as a former mayor of Owensboro who once made a congressional bid. Dave Adkisson joining us today, and we welcome you and thanks for coming.
Thanks very much, Bill. Good to be here. Happy Thanksgiving.
And to you. Appreciate that. What are your observations and what are you hearing about the economy across Kentucky right now?
Well, we've done two surveys recently. One was a purely statistical, data-based survey of population, wages, and jobs in the 9 regions of Kentucky. And that showed that the state is growing. We went back to the recession, 09, 10. And charted it from there forward, and the state is gaining in those 3 areas. Obviously, there are regional differences. Eastern Kentucky is still hurting from the downturn in the coal market, et cetera, and they've lost population, et cetera. But Kentucky as a whole is moving up in those 3 categories: jobs, population, and wages. We are not keeping up with the national average, and part of that is that we're in the middle of the country. And, you know, it's the coast and the metropolitan areas, the big metropolitan areas that seem to be growing the fastest. But we did outpace the surrounding states, with the exception of Ohio and Tennessee. We outpaced West Virginia, Ohio, Missouri, in those surrounding states in our growth, which was encouraging. The other survey we did was more about business confidence. And we asked our members across the state, we have thousands of members, businesses that join the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. We asked them how they feel about Kentucky being on the right track or wrong track. And we last asked this 3 years ago. Well, short version is people are far more confident, feel that I think 63% said Kentucky was on the right track, as opposed to like 49% before, so a dramatic increase. And then in terms of economic conditions and general confidence, they were up almost double since 3 years ago.
This seems to be basically some confidence in where government policy is related to business right now?
Yes, over the last couple of years, there have been several pro-business policies passed by our legislature. There's been a conscientious attempt by the Bevin administration to look at regulations that inhibit business. And so, yes, that has been felt in the business community in general, and there's an optimism about business conditions being good, economy expanding, and overall growth still coming out of the recession.
I know we're talking long-term trends, but how much does the holiday season factor into the way people feel about how things are going, especially in retail?
Right. In retail, I mean, the holiday season makes you or breaks you, you know. So I think going into the holiday season with business confidence being up, that's an encouraging thing. Some people say, well, we're in the 8th inning of this economic expansion, you know, what's coming next. But for right now, the business confidence is there, and I think that's showing up in retail sales.
Do we still have an issue with a lot of open positions in Kentucky that can't be filled because either the workforce is not properly trained to do that, or the ongoing drug issues that we have?
Yes. We still have a significant workforce issue. That is the most common thing we hear from business people. Large businesses like UPS and Toyota, and small businesses also. People just can't find the number of workers and the workers with the right skills, in other words, the quality of candidates. So that's going to be a continuing issue. We opened up a workforce center within our chamber a year ago, had 1 employee. We now have 8 employees in that workforce center. That's how dominant that issue is for business people.
And what do you do for businesses there?
We've got people stationed around the state now, 4 people out around the state that are actually working to put together, for example, manufacturers in Hopkinsville or hospitals in Louisville, construction companies in the Lexington area, put them together and get them to strategically plan their own workforce future. Get businesses involved in saying, hey, hospitals in Louisville might need, I don't know, pick a number, 3,000 nurses in the next 5 years. How are we going to train them? Is it going to be the community college system, a proprietary school? We're going to have to go across the river to Indiana to get some. How are we going to get those? So it's business people planning their workforce futures.
There seems to be an ongoing debate in Kentucky about how much we can afford to invest in, say, higher education and in workforce training. The Bevin administration obviously has moved into that workforce development area. The public universities and colleges have been constantly cut by state government for the last 10 years. Is that an area of concern to you?
Yes. As workforce is the biggest issue, the biggest solution for that is education and training. And so education continues to be the top strategic priority of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. As a matter of fact, on December 3rd, we're going to release a report from the Business Education Roundtable. That's a group of 14 people, about 7 top education leaders, 7 top business leaders that have been meeting for 2 years and are preparing a report to basically lay out a strategy. Here are the things we need to concentrate over the next decade or more, the next generation. Here are the things that will help Kentucky remain competitive.
Any hint about that report?
I'd rather wait till December 3rd. There's some people that are going to be putting that out at that time.
But it sounds like education will be
It is an education report.
Work requirements for Medicaid have been approved by the Trump administration again for Kentucky. Now, a court held that off last year when it was approved, last summer. Is that something that you see as a positive development as a business community?
Yes, we generally support that idea that most of us who are fortunate to be employed have to work to get our health insurance. And so a reasonable requirement to do what I think they're calling community engagement, which could be volunteer service, it could be getting an education, it could be work. 20 hours a week, I think, is the plan. Of course, there's a huge issue then, how do you administer that? How do you keep track of it? Who monitors it? And that sort of thing. But I think most Americans, especially employed Americans who are paying taxes, would agree that, yeah, people ought to work. They ought to be engaged, and that some of their benefits, not core benefits, but some of their benefits would relate to their willingness to do that.
The Kentucky Supreme Court also recently struck down these medical review panels, which was a kind of tort reform. I would think that business has some interest, certainly, in that, in trying to limit the potential frivolous suits that are filed.
That's right. There is a problem in Kentucky with frivolous lawsuits being filed. The big problem is one that never hits the book, so to speak, in terms of our court system, because a company gets sued and their insurance carrier insists that the company settle that before it ever gets in court. And so settlements, I talked to a major business in Lexington recently, and they said, when we have to go to court, we win. We get in front of a jury, we win those cases. But what costs us money is that we settle 90%. We have to settle before you ever get to a court. So, yeah, the Kentucky legal climate is not very good for business. Medical review panels was an attempt to try to weed through those frivolous lawsuits. It got struck down. Clearly, that's a setback for the efforts to try to reform the legal climate. But there are those of us who will continue to press the issue that we've got to do something about the cost of the legal climate in Kentucky.
You'll be releasing your legislative agenda along with that study you referred to on December 3rd. There'll be an event for that. It will include positions within infrastructure, energy, healthcare, education, criminal justice, and politics as we head into a statewide election year next year. What are some of the things that you're hearing that your members want you to put as a high priority?
Well, one thing is unresolved, a major thing, and that's pension reform, because right now that stands before the Kentucky Supreme Court. Some people anticipate that there will be a decision rendered mid-December. If by chance the bill that was passed in the 2018 session on pension reform is ruled unconstitutional because of the way it was passed, the content's really not at issue before the Supreme Court, it's the way it was passed. So if that is turned back at that time, I think there will be a certain amount of chaos. Other bills, other laws in Kentucky have been passed that way. So we would be back in the 2019 session pushing for pension reform if indeed there is an issue turned back by the court, if the issue is turned back by the court. If not, I think it's a matter of monitoring the two systems, the teachers' retirement system and the Kentucky retirement system, which is state and local workers primarily, monitoring them, make sure their assumptions are right, etc. It's going to take a generation to come out of this hole that we dug for ourselves. It's a shame because it's hurting our colleges, it's hurting our schools, it's hurting our teachers.
To try to soften some of the cuts and to put more money into pensions, the legislature extended the sales tax to some services. There may have been unintended consequences in that this came to include nonprofits.
That's right.
And so they have been loud about that. There's a division of the chamber, in fact, that has been subjected to that in the charitable arm of your organization. So do you think that will be addressed in this session?
Yes, I think that will be one of the first things that is addressed by the legislature, the tax on raffle tickets, or if you're going to your church's fish fry and you have to pay 6% on the admissions ticket, that sort of thing. That was an unintended consequence, and I sense that there's bipartisan support among legislators to turn that back. It's not huge dollars. That little piece is not huge dollars. So there will be a fix, so to speak. In other words, a few things that have to be kind of fine-tuned about the tax package that was passed in 2018. The question is whether or not there would be a bigger package. My sense is the idea of the likelihood of a fix is, I'd say 90%. The likelihood of a package, maybe 50-50.
Yeah. Well, but when they
a bigger package.
If they take that element out, there'll be some revenue lost, so there'll be something to have to work out there. I understand the chamber is also going to push for some highway, streets, and road improvements in the Commonwealth.
Yes, our infrastructure is falling behind. More people, and this is a good thing, more people are driving energy-efficient cars. More people are driving hybrids, driving electric cars. And so the money that normally would come in from the gasoline pump for taxes on the gasoline is not replenishing, and we can't maintain the bridges and roads we have or build new ones. And business, to operate businesses, you have to have roads and bridges. Other things too, like buses in the urban areas. People in Lexington and Louisville complain about congestion, and they need new traffic lights that are timed better and that kind of stuff. All of that is in this infrastructure issue. And so, yes, one of our top priorities will be to push for alleviating that. Some of it will be related to the gas tax, but we also need to look at modernizing the road fund in terms of where revenue comes from.
Dave Adkisson is with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. We are, of course, talking about issues facing the Commonwealth and the business community. We're going to come back in a moment. Workplace safety, another issue we'll talk about. And in Washington, some changes for Kentucky as well. And we'll be back. Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey on his winter outlook a little later. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT, continuing our visit with Dave Adkisson, who runs the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. He was telling us it's growing, by the way. You're having to do a little building over there, right?
That's right. So, we need to expand our chamber headquarters.
Good issue to have. The opioid crisis in Kentucky is deep. We touched on it just a little bit earlier, but it's a profound issue for certainly families and individuals and for business in the state.
Right. With the economy growing and with baby boomers retiring, we need every worker that companies can find right now to continue to grow this economy. And there are three issues in Kentucky that are affecting our ability and keeping over 150,000 people sort of on the sidelines who we would love to see engage. One is addiction, and that gets to opioids and other addictions, but addiction. One is disability, and one is incarceration. Those are three areas, and we've started to move into policies that you might not have thought a Chamber of Commerce would be that interested in 10 years ago, but for example, criminal justice reform. And we will have a bill this time relating to bail reform. That really needs to be modernized. It's keeping some people in jail because they can't pay the bail, even though their offense is minor. So
when potentially they could go back to work.
That's right. That's right. So we're looking at all those things. The opioid situation is horrible in Kentucky. It's horrible across the country, but we're kind of at the epicenter, and we're moving in the direction of getting employers engaged. Employers are having to kind of rethink their zero tolerance policies in the past because they need their workers. And so we're doing some assistance for businesses that are willing to hire folks who have struggled with that issue.
Workplace safety keeps grabbing our attention in this state. We have so many reports of violence and shootings and so forth. Is the Chamber in a position to help businesses address that or come up with plans?
Yes, we've done some work in that area. We've done it ourselves at our chamber. We had active shooter training for our employees. What if somebody comes into the building loaded up, that kind of thing. And the Lexington Police Department offers that kind of training. We're trying to provide some guidance to businesses across the state as to how they can secure their facilities better. We had an incident this week in Campbellsville, I believe, of someone that was apprehended who apparently meant to do significant damage. So that's an issue that no business can ignore these days.
Sports betting looks to be on the agenda for the legislature. There are going to be all kinds of lobbying efforts on all sides of that issue, it appears as well. Does the Chamber take a position on sports
We're favorable
betting?
to that,
yeah.
And I think there's strong bipartisan support to pass a bill relating to sports betting. After the Supreme Court decision earlier this year, I think you'll see states all working to accommodate sports betting. It's happening anyhow. And so how to harness that and do it in a way that's, that doesn't hurt our state and can gain some revenue for our schools and government services.
First new racetrack in almost 25 years will go into western Kentucky. Will include slot machines and historical racing. It's a joint venture of Keeneland and Churchill Downs. Is that a good step for economic development?
That area is very enthusiastic about that, and we've been generally supportive of expanded gaming in Kentucky. And yeah, that's a big complex, and it's being done by players who, by business interests that have a track record of doing quality work.
In Washington, 5 of the 6 Kentucky House members who are Republicans will be moving from the majority to the minority, while Kentucky's only Democrat in the House, John Yarmouth, could be budget chairman. Does that reality change your D.C. strategy and outlook?
We all have to adjust, of course, and we knew that Congressman Yarmouth was rising in the leadership ranks on the Democratic side when they were in the minority. Now they're in the majority. And so, yes, we would naturally want to engage with him as he makes big decisions for the federal government. We hate to lose Hal Rogers from his subcommittee appropriations position, Andy Barr from his subcommittee position too, but you know, that's the give and take of politics. And our philosophy is we work with the folks that you send to Frankfort and you send to Washington.
Amazon decided to split its East Coast headquarters that it will be building between New York and the Metro D.C. area. Louisville had put a proposal together, but in the end, you know, Amazon cited high levels of educated workers as a key reason that they went where they did. Is it reasonable for Kentucky to think we can be in the running for such things?
Well, Amazon is a huge, huge deal. You won't see that once a decade in the United States, to have somebody holding 50,000 jobs out there that they're going to locate somewhere. Of course, they did divide it into 2 locations. But yes, we can compete for certain types of things. Any business is going to make a decision, where can we get our workers, where can we get our transportation network. Louisville is profiting from the fact that UPS is located there. Amazon's locating a huge operation at the Northern Kentucky Airport. And there will be companies that gravitate toward those logistics hubs because they need to ship their product out overnight. I think over 100 companies have come to the Louisville area because of UPS, just like over 150 companies have come to Kentucky because of Toyota 30 years ago. So we'll have our shot when a company is looking at an advantage that we can offer, like central location, like air transportation. That's where I think we will shine.
What else, as we head into the legislative session and the governor's race next year, do you want the business community to keep its focus on?
I think workforce is the area where we all have to focus. And businesses can no longer just run an ad in the paper and say, we need a skilled maintenance person for our factory. We sure hope some of you will apply. They have to be more strategic, and they have to partner with their tech schools, their community college, other providers of training, so that they have a pipeline. And you'll hear that word a lot in the future in terms of the talent pipeline. They need a talent pipeline so that they know that they have a supply of the workers they need. That's the real challenge for the business community in Kentucky.
A precious commodity.
It
right?
is.
If you'd like more information about the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, we'll put the website up there, kychamber.com, for members and non-members. Everybody
That's
can
right.
check it out.
That's right.
Dave Adkisson, as always, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Happy
Great to be.
holidays to you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Stay with us now. Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey will be here in just a moment. His outlook for winter next on Kentucky Newsmakers. And welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. I'm over here in the WKYT First Alert Weather Center now with our Chief Meteorologist, Chris Bailey, who is out with his winter outlook. And a lot of folks look forward to that. And I know you had it on the news, but it gets a lot of people talking. We'd like to know kind of how you put this together.
You know what? And good to have you on this side of the studio for a change, right?
Exactly. Good to come over here. All right, so here's the deal. We had basically no fall.
We did. You had one day of it.
Right.
If you remember, we were into the middle 80s until the middle of October.
Yeah.
And then it flipped on a dime.
It was like summer stayed with us, and here we went.
And it snowed, and we've had sleet. 8 days already.
Isn't that unbelievable?
That's absolutely crazy.
I mean, isn't that an early onset of winter?
I think it is. I think it's a sign of where we're going. It's kind of the appetizer before you get the main dish that is served. And that appetizer from Mother Nature has been a little snow, sleet. We even had parts of the region with an ice storm already. Crazy.
Yes, we did. And it's been very cold, I mean, for this time of year.
Yeah, November is way colder than normal.
So before we get into what you see coming up in the weeks and months ahead, how do you put this together? What are you looking at?
I look at a lot of the stats from across Kentucky on how the year is kind of stacking up so far, summer and especially into fall. Then I go back and try to match those up with prior years and say, okay, this is what happened then. It's similar to what happened now. Was there any correlation amongst all those years about how they turned out? Then I look out in the Pacific Ocean. I know you're thinking, well, what the heck are you doing out in the Pacific Ocean? What does that have to do with Pikeville or the weather in Bourbon County?
Those steering winds.
Those steering winds. It's the biggest, baddest body of water on the earth, and it has a direct impact on our weather. It steers everything. And we look at, I'm going to show you a map here, what I'm looking at, Bill. You've heard of El Nino, right?
Right.
So we've got a weak El Nino that is coming on. The water placement of that El Nino is in the central Pacific right now. Why is that important? Well, when you start to see those abnormally warm waters that are centered in the central Pacific like that, it tends to lead to colder weather across the eastern part of the country. Now, you see that big blob of red? If that were over several hundred miles off the coast of Peru, that's more of a warm signal in our part of the world. So it's interesting that no two El Ninos are created equally. And you look at the strength of them, you look at where they're placed, and the placement on this argues for colder than normal temperatures across our part of the world. And that is certainly something we're going to continue to watch for as we go in. Now, also, let's go to the Gulf of Alaska off the west coast. What do we have there? A big old pool of warm water. Kind of like it's way above normal. And what that does is that also gives the eastern part of the country some warm or the cold weather with the warm weather out across the western part of the country, because that generally promotes the jet stream that will take a big dip across the eastern part of the country. So you can see the west is generally warmer than normal, which, by the way, is bad news for California, given how dry they've been, the fire situation. But look at that big teardrop of cold across the eastern part of the country, and that includes right here in Kentucky. So that's the general setup, and that cold, Bill, will often in an El Nino winter be accompanied by southern storms that kind of ride up the eastern seaboard.
Which is where we often get our snow. I mean, when it comes out of that, we used to call it the Texas low, sliding across the southern states.
And you know what? We've already had one of those. That brought the ice and the snow last week. That was a system that came from Texas and kind of up the eastern seaboard, brought a nor'easter up there and brought us ice and snow. So we've already had a little preview of that, and it's only November.
So how does it go as we head into December, January?
Let me show you. Let's go back to this map, and I'm going to show you exactly what I've put together in terms of the winter forecast. Here's kind of everything in a nutshell, Bill, and I've got some years on there that have been similar to this one. So I think it's a colder than normal winter, severe cold shots, and probably snowier than normal. Get a lot of frequent flakes that will be flying, and the analog years. Those years, I've looked back since 1950 to try to find the best matches. So there you go, from the most recent to the 60s. I went all the way back into, again, 1950. There are some heavyweights on there. 77, 78.
Yeah.
You know, kids didn't go to school for 2 months.
That was rough.
That was a rough one.
But 13 and 14
13,
were pretty
14
rough.
was rough. 14, 15 gave us those big back-to-back snowstorms in February and March. But one of the top, if I'm picking 2 of those years that have been the best match, it would be 2002. 03, that gave us the ice storm.
It did.
In, February of 03, and 77, 78. So those are 2 winters that are pretty big ones. Now, if we break it down month by month, I think December, in comparison to normal, is closest to normal for that particular month. As you get into January and February, those are typically colder anyway, but those should be even colder than normal across our part of the country. And snowfall, you look at this and you're thinking, boy, that's a lot of snow. And it is. We average about 16 inches in Lexington.
Yeah.
And last year we picked up 23 inches. So it's not like it doesn't happen. Past 10 years, we've had colder and snowier than normal winters. And here's what everybody kind of looks for. Now, given that the years I've looked back at, they all have produced some big storms around here. So, Bill, I think at least one time this year, one single storm, gives you snow, ice, and flooding at the same time. Not in one location, but I'm talking about maybe flooding in southeastern Kentucky, snow and ice into central Kentucky. One of those type of storms.
Well, interesting winter ahead.
Well, you just wind me up and turn me loose, didn't you?
That's all right. We really appreciate it. Thanks for letting us come over here and stop by and get that update. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT this morning. Of course, Chris in the evenings. Thank you so much for joining us, and you make it a good week ahead.